What if I told you that a former president of the United States just had his passport confiscated, not suspended, not reviewed, confiscated, and flagged as an extreme flight risk? Tonight, we break down what this means, how we got here, and why this moment could mark one of the most unprecedented chapters in modern American political history. Because this is no longer just about courtrooms. This is about mobility, power, and the symbolism of control. Let's start with the headline. According to multiple reports, authorities have confiscated Donald Trump's passport under what is being described as a heightened legal precaution. Sources close to the matter say the justification centers around concerns that he could attempt to leave U.S. jurisdiction while facing escalating legal exposure. And here's the phrase that changed everything: flight risk extreme. Those two words carry enormous legal weight. In the American justice system, being labeled a flight risk is not symbolic. It's procedural. It can determine bail conditions, monitoring requirements, and in some cases, whether someone retains the ability to travel at all. But applying that label to a former president, that's historic. Now let's slow this down and unpack what's actually happening. First, passport confiscation is not automatically a declaration of guilt. It is a preventative measure. Courts sometimes restrict travel if they believe a defendant has the means, connections, or incentive to avoid prosecution. And in Trump's case, the argument from critics is simple. He has international contacts, significant financial resources, private aviation access, and ongoing legal pressure. Supporters, however, are calling this politically motivated escalation. They argue that a former president with Secret Service protection and constant public visibility cannot realistically disappear. So which is it? Is this standard legal caution applied equally, or is this an extraordinary move reflecting extraordinary political stakes? To understand that, we need context. Donald Trump is currently facing multiple legal battles across different jurisdictions: civil cases, criminal indictments, appeals, investigations. Each one carries potential financial penalties, legal consequences, and reputational damage. But here's what makes this moment different. Passport confiscation crosses from courtroom procedure into public symbolism. Travel is freedom. And restricting it sends a message, intentional or not, so that the system views the risk as real. Now let's address the term borders alerted. What does that actually mean? When a high-profile individual is restricted from travel, authorities can notify border agencies, customs officials, and in some cases, international partners. This does not mean global manhunts or dramatic airport arrests. It means data flags, digital alerts, system-level notifications. If an attempt is made to exit, it triggers scrutiny. Again, this is procedural. But because of who we're talking about, it becomes geopolitical. Think about the optics. A former US president potentially stopped at an airport. That would be a global headline in seconds. Markets would react, allies would question, adversaries would watch closely, and this is where the story becomes bigger than one man. This is about institutional authority, the American legal system asserting that no one is above procedural safeguards. But here's the tension. Half the country sees accountability, the other half sees persecution, and that divide amplifies everything. Now let's talk legal mechanics. For a passport to be confiscated in a high-profile case, a court typically evaluates several factors: risk of non-appearance, severity of charges, financial capacity to flee, access to foreign residency or influence, past compliance with court orders. So far, Trump has appeared in court when required. He has not attempted to leave jurisdiction illegally. That complicates the extreme label. However, prosecutors may argue that the scale of potential consequences, financial judgments, criminal exposure, increases incentive. And in law, incentive matters. But here's what many viewers are asking. Could a former president realistically flee? Practically speaking, it would be extraordinarily difficult. Secret Service protocols alone create logistical barriers. Every movement is tracked, documented, coordinated. But the legal system doesn't operate on likelihood alone. It operates on risk tolerance, and when stakes are high, tolerance drops. Now let's zoom out. This moment is unprecedented in modern American history. We have never seen a former president under this degree of legal scrutiny while simultaneously remaining a dominant political force. And that dual reality creates friction. On one hand, Trump remains a central figure in American politics. On the other hand, he is a defendant in multiple proceedings. Those two worlds are colliding, and passport confiscation becomes the visible symbol of that collision. So what happens next? 3 possible scenarios. Scenario 1. The restriction remains temporary. Courts review, conditions adjust, and travel may eventually be restored under supervision. Scenario 2. Legal pressures intensify. Additional conditions are imposed, monitoring expands. Scenario 3, appeals challenge the measure, arguing that it is excessive or politically motivated. And here's where the story truly becomes volatile. If Trump frames this as governmental overreach, it energizes his base. If courts frame this as routine precaution, they attempt to normalize it. But normalization may not be possible in such a polarized environment. Now let's address the international dimension. If foreign governments see the US restricting the movement of a former head of state, how does that shape perception of American stability? Authoritarian regimes may point to it as evidence of internal chaos. Democratic allies may see it as proof that rule of law applies universally. The interpretation depends entirely on the lens, and that's why this story is bigger than a passport. It's about narrative control. Now let's be clear about something important. Passport confiscation does not mean house arrest. It does not mean imprisonment. It does not mean conviction. It means restricted international travel pending legal resolution. But in politics, optics often outweigh technical definitions. The phrase flight risk extreme is powerful. It implies urgency, danger, potential instability, and whether that language was strategically chosen or legally standardized, it's shaping public perception right now. So here's the core question. Is this a protective legal safeguard? Or a dramatic escalation in an already historic legal saga? The answer may depend less on the courtroom and more on the next few months of political movement. Because if Trump continues campaigning, holding rallies, dominating headlines, this action becomes fuel. If legal battles intensify and new charges emerge, this action becomes a footnote in a larger storm. Either way, tonight marks a new phase. A former president with restricted mobility, borders alerted, legal tension rising, political polarization deepening, and the world watching. Because when the movement of a former commander-in-chief becomes legally constrained, it signals something profound. The institutions are under stress, the stakes are high, and the outcome is far from settled. We will continue tracking every development, every filing, every response, every legal twist. Because this is no longer just about one man, it's about precedent, and precedent shapes history. Stay with us.